a KCRA television color presentation.
60 years covering the news.
The news comes first on TV3.
Wow! Grandma's gonna be able to see us get married.
Across Northern California.
Sacramento's West End.
An eerie sight in Truckee.
At least 3 officers have been shot in Sacramento and Placer counties.
That's something never done before.
And around the world.
The Afghans have had a difficult life.
Reporting from Red Square.
From Nottingham.
At the Sochi Olympics.
Here in Mexico.
Big stories. Breaking stories.
The fire has now jumped Highway 120.
Our stories.
She was going to do great things.
60 years of being first. Of being where the news comes first. Tonight, a KCRA 3 special. 60 Years of Excellence. With Edie Lambert and Golston Dart.
For the past 60 years, 5 words have been the defining phrase at KCRA, where the news comes first.
More than just a slogan, it has defined who we are, what we do, and our commitment to the people we serve all across Northern California. It is our legacy. September 3rd, 1955, KCRA television went on the air for the first time. It wasn't a newscast that marked our start, but a live broadcast from the California State Fair. That first broadcast, a small but significant step, was the start of what would become a 60-year legacy, during which the Kelly family would establish KCRA as a news powerhouse.
Where the news comes first.
Our call letters were already familiar. KCRA Radio had gone on the air 10 years earlier, founded by Ewing Kelly and the Hanson family, owners of Crystal Creamery. But television? Well, that was a whole new frontier.
Channel 3 spans the length and breadth of Northern California to bring you the fastest, most complete news coverage in this area.
I crown you Maid of California.
In 1956, Channel 3 Reports was born, and very quickly, KCRA earned a reputation as one of the top TV stations in the country. One of KCRA's first reporters and anchors was a fresh-faced Stan Atkinson.
I did the 11 o'clock news with Stu Nahan. It was 5-minute news and 5-minute sports. And my sponsor was Hostess Cinnamon Dainties. And so I'd stand there for the first 3 minutes and do the news. And then the floor man would roll in a table that was decorated with open or still packaged Hostess Cinnamon Dainties. Hostess Cinnamon Dainties, I'd say. Got it? Hostess Cinnamon Dainties. I'd take another bite. Get them.
Color film was available, but it was expensive. KCRA's first reports were in black and white.
The newscasts and the sportscasts were incredibly successful. I mean, the ratings were huge. And I mean, bear in mind, this is like 1958, 59, 60. Television was still an oddity, as it were.
At KCRA, we had proved our commitment to news and the community almost from the start.
Hello, I'm Mike Boyd. Has television news always seemed to be the quiet corner in your TV viewing? Well, not anymore.
Over the years, our commitment to news coverage grew, and on February 20th, 1961, we launched our first hour-long newscast at 6 p.m.
We were the first to do a really segmented hour-long newscast, the first in the country.
And as the Sacramento area grew, there was a lot to cover.
During that time, a lot of the news coverage centered around the redevelopment of Old Sacramento. That was a huge and ongoing news story for a long time.
We are currently in the process of converting a slum and blighted area into a valuable new integral part of our downtown.
By the early 60s, television news was coming into its own, finding its way, even if the tools and technology were still a bit challenging by today's standards.
Our unsung heroes for the photographers were the guys who processed the film. They knew how to cut in film if they had a run going and something was breaking and they had to get it in. You still had to wait 20 minutes, 30 minutes, whatever the film was, to get out of the soup. It had to dry, and then you had to edit it. So there was a very big time lag compared to today.
But things would soon change.
The news comes first on Channel 3. Now, you've heard that statement many times. Well, very shortly, the news will not only still be first, but many segments will be in color.
A legacy of new technology with the first color broadcast.
This is Harry Martin, KCRA News, reminding you that the news comes first in full color on Color Vision 3.
First color news film, and the first regular live remotes.
Live in the capital city.
Live from across the country.
Our political reporter Steve Swat standing by live for us from New Orleans tonight.
And from the air.
We are giving you exclusive close-up pictures of this fire.
I always used to consider myself as the first strike tool. You know, we'd get there, we'd get it on the air, we'd give a perspective that you couldn't see from the ground.
It was that kind of thing that established KCRA's superiority in the marketplace.
The signature of KCRA at the time was
KCRA TV Channel 3, where the news comes first.
That was trademarked by the Kelly family, and they actually meant it. They actually came up with the concept that if you want ratings, you want to be the most important station in a market, then you have to have the best newscast, and they did.
Through the decades, the KCRA news team evolved, expanded, became more diverse, and very familiar.
Hi, everybody. I'm Dave Walker.
And I'm Lois Hart.
In 1990, Dave Walker and Lois Hart, the husband and wife team who had anchored CNN's first newscast, took over weekends on KCRA.
When I came in here for my interview, and the weekend anchors were Dave Walker and Lois Hart, and I knew them from CNN. And I'm thinking, what kind of television station is this that their weekend anchors are Dave and Lois? What must the rest of the team be like?
Eventually, Dave and Lois, Stan Atkinson, and other well-known faces would make way for the current team. I'm so lucky that people like Edie Lambert and Lois Hart and Dave Walker were here to kind of bring me into the fold with open arms. And Edie and I ever since have been, I think, a great team.
I see it as a huge responsibility, and I am so careful to make sure that we're giving good context to what we're watching on TV, and that we're not just speculating on what we're seeing, sticking to the facts, giving people the information that they need to know.
KCRA is one of the premier television stations in the country, has had a long legacy of excellence.
Station president and general manager Elliot Troshinsky oversees KCRA, which in 1999 became part of Hearst, one of the nation's most diversified media, information, and technology companies.
When you hear the letters KCRA, it means a lot, and it means a lot not just in this market, but all around the country.
And almost from the very start, something else would set KCRA apart.
If you wanted a story, you had to go get it.
KCRA News in Vigo, Galicia, Spain.
We quickly expanded our sites to include not just California and the rest of the country, but the world as well.
The outrage was universal when the Soviets invaded Afghanistan.
We had a number of reporters that traveled, but Stan Atkinson probably risked most when he went to Afghanistan.
Throughout history, the Afghans have had a difficult life, but it's easy for them to accept that. They take it as God-given.
The opportunity to tell those stories was the best part of my career. I mean, there were amazing experiences. I mean, Afghanistan was just unbelievable in 1981 when I went in.
They cut off and bombard enemy forts until they surrender.
I got held up in El Salvador and robbed, and got chased by a Soviet gunship into a cave in Afghanistan.
I think I went to about 10 different foreign countries.
Businessmen see this former Soviet Union.
I did 2 overseas series, one in Germany,
where the communist East German government is actually selling people to the West. This year, an estimated 40,000 East Germans will be sold.
And one on the occupied West Bank.
It was formed outside of Jericho after the formation of Israel in 1948.
2 reporters went over to cover the Palestinian situation. One traveled with the Israelis. I traveled with the Palestinians.
Good evening from Tel Aviv. Governor Schwarzenegger's fame here in Israel has more to do, of course, with Hollywood than with his own political skills.
The station always had a real commitment to covering stories that were important to people in this area. And of course, part of our job was not just to go cover the story, but to bring home any kind of California connection or California angle.
The Honorable Arnold Schwarzenegger, Governor of California.
Schwarzenegger was going to Jerusalem to preside over the groundbreaking of a new Museum of Tolerance. Schwarzenegger's father was a member of the Nazi Party during World War II, so the irony was impossible to ignore.
In July of 2014, Governor Brown led a 5-day expedition to Mexico to meet with top officials there. My marching orders before leaving for Mexico was make sure you bring back an exclusive one-on-one interview with the governor. By day 4, I still didn't have the interview. Used my persuasive powers and somehow tonight in a one-on-one interview got him into the room, and the press secretary said, "You've got 3 minutes, go." He said, "This is a very complex problem. There's no easy solution. What is the answer?"
The answer is not to scapegoat.
I timed it on my watch. It was 52 seconds from top to bottom. I think that's the shortest one-on-one interview I've ever had with the governor ever.
Hi, Edie. How are you? Good to see you again. How have you been?
Well, thank you. How about you?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much.
Traveling to the White House is certainly a point of pride for any newsroom, and we've been able to do it twice recently. And to be able to ask the President of the United States about the issues directly affecting this region, we know is a huge benefit for our viewers.
We have the best and most innovative IT, computer services, products in the world. And when it comes to innovation, California is our capital. These are going to be the huge markets of the future.
We're really proud to be able to bring those answers from the President of the United States straight to our viewers.
Let's get this done! I remember if you go to the elections of 2012, we were at the convention in Charlotte, and David and I were supposed to be there to cover the convention together, and Mitt Romney was the odds-on favorite to get the nomination. He was pretty much a sure thing. And at the same time, hurricanes broke out in the South. We had 2 people there. Why not split us up? I'll stay at the convention. David will go cover the hurricane.
Good evening from Slidell, Louisiana, where the winds and the rain have been building all afternoon. Houses like the one behind me collapsed during Hurricane Katrina.
KCRA continues to travel for stories that matter to people in Northern California.
Hundreds gather here at Gateway High School in Aurora to say goodbye, to say a prayer. One of the big stories I remember covering for KCRA was the Aurora, Colorado movie theater shooting. And I had grown up in Denver, spent most of my life there, and so they called me and said, "We want you to go, we want you to be there field anchoring," and it was a huge story. It was one of those heartbreaking stories that I'll never forget.
It's that kind of attitude and commitment that in April of 2013 took us to New York City.
Well, we had already been on the East Coast covering another story, the NBA's decision about whether or not to move the Kings to Seattle. And it became apparent one morning while we were there in New York City that that decision wasn't going to happen.
And then to Boston, where we found ourselves in the middle of the Boston Marathon bombing manhunt.
The marathon bombing had happened several days before, and now there had been this manhunt overnight where there had been a shootout in a suburb of Boston. And so I spoke with the news director, Lori Walton, that morning, and she said, "Yeah, we should get on the road. We should go to Boston."
2 more bangs right there.
That's a total of 6 by my count. We can see, are we seeing those flashes?
As we're running, I'm on the phone to Sacramento saying, "You'll want to take our signal live now."
Up pops KCRA3's David Bienick in this Boston neighborhood, and he is on the front lines of where these police have cornered one of the suspects, Dzhokhar Tsarnaev, the lone surviving suspect.
There are 2 more bangs right there.
KCRA's breaking news coverage would be seen on TV stations across the country.
There's only a handful of stations that I know of in the country that sees themselves as almost like a mini network.
There is no downtime for this unit. The minute we arrive in Gulfport, they get to work.
They're not afraid to disperse people and resources like a network would.
Good evening from the White House.
My series of special reports from Cuba continues.
KCRA News on the desert of southern Iran.
At Hamastron, Honduras.
From Nottingham.
In Beijing.
In New York City.
In Glendale, Arizona.
Live on Waikiki Beach in Honolulu on the island of Oahu.
In Mexico City, Mike Lurie, KCRA 3 News.
First on the air, last off the air, with accurate election results you can count on. For meaningful campaign coverage that brings you the real concerns of real people.
From the very start, KCRA's commitment to political coverage has been unmatched. Pegboards, black and white monitors, and cutout pictures of the candidates, that was high tech at the time. But while a bit quaint by today's standards, they would be the foundation for decades of coverage to come.
7 national conventions, 3 New Hampshire primaries, and the list goes on and on.
My photographer and I ended up staying up till 4 o'clock in the morning.
Being on the air at 2 in the morning, reporting back on returns.
I've interviewed Hillary Clinton one-on-one.
We hosted a town hall with President Bill Clinton.
A California town hall meeting with President Clinton.
The president came and he answered questions. KCRA was at the forefront of that. We hosted this entire town hall for Northern California.
Welcome to what should be an exciting, informative, and enlightening 90 minutes of live television.
And KCRA was the epicenter of the political coverage of what was happening at that time.
First of all, let me thank all of you for being here tonight.
It was seen all over California. We partnered with NBC stations in San Diego and Los Angeles and San Francisco and here. We hosted the President of the United States in this building.
Bill Clinton was just one of many presidents we've covered in Sacramento.
The next President of the United States, Senator John F. Kennedy.
John F. Kennedy, running for president, stopped in Sacramento, and KCRA's cameras were there.
Thank you.
As they were when Charles Manson follower Squeaky Fromme tried to assassinate President Ford right in front of the state capitol.
I just want to tell the incoming governor that I want to give him all the cooperation that I possibly can.
When it comes to California politics, there has always been an interesting cast of characters. From one actor who was elected governor and who went on to become president.
Good morning.
To another movie star who would make his own mark on California's political scene.
I have never covered a political story like the recall of Gray Davis and the election of Arnold Schwarzenegger. It was chaotic, it was unpredictable, it was so much fun to cover because you didn't know what was going to happen. I went down to Los Angeles in 2003 when Arnold Schwarzenegger was scheduled to be on The Tonight Show.
The taping of that Tonight Show may have been closed to reporters, but we had an inside source that put KCRA ahead of the other stations.
So I had a friend in the control room there at the NBC Bureau, and I called her cell phone. And she held her cell phone up to the speaker as they were taping. So I'm standing out in front where all the cameras and all the live trucks are there in Burbank, and I'm listening at about 4:45 when I hear Arnold utter the words,
"I'm going to run for governor of the state of California."
Yes, he's going to run for governor of California, which gave me a little bit of a jump start on the others because other people had to wait until a news conference after the fact.
I think one of the biggest highlights for me was a small moment when I was chasing Newt Gingrich, who was running for the Republican presidential nomination in South Carolina.
Mr. Speaker, how much of a comeback is this for you? Well, huge.
I caught up to him and I asked him a question, and he turned to me and he said, "Wow, you've done your homework." And that was one of the biggest compliments that I've ever gotten, because politicians normally don't give out compliments to reporters.
I just remember specifically in November of 2008, election night, just the historical importance of it all, and still being in the background, covering it and watching it all unfold.
We are and always will be the United States of America.
Watching history being made that night was really, really something to see.
KCRA was at the forefront of political coverage again when we co-hosted a debate between business executive Meg Whitman and then Attorney General Jerry Brown, who was back trying to regain the job he had held decades earlier.
When KCRA held a debate in 2010 between him and Meg Whitman, I asked him, "The last time you were governor, you ran for president twice, the first time within 2 years of taking office. What assurances can you offer voters that this time around, should you be elected, you would focus on this job?"
Age? Hell, if I was younger, I'd be running again. But I'd say at 74, whatever it's going to be in a couple of years, I'm ready. One more thing, I now have a wife, and I come home at night. I don't try to close down the bars of Sacramento like I used to do when I was governor of California.
Our live broadcast aired in every city across California and was seen by more than 2.5 million people. It's the kind of commitment that's sometimes made for some very late election nights.
Boxer race was really close, like very close, too close to call. No one would call it. And I think we were the only people left in the Fairmont waiting outside her room, waiting for her to come out And you know, she's so tiny, and I'm short too. And she's actually shorter than I am. But that one really stands out because that was like, we're not leaving, you know, we're gonna stick it out. And it was history, you know, political history, because we have a long tradition of politics.
It's over, we've done it, I love it.
From the days of pegboards and black and white live coverage and new ways to transmit information.
Watch the lower third of your screen because that's where we'll have our election results posted for you tonight.
To the tiny screen you now hold in your hand, KCRA has been riding waves of innovation.
Our Brian Heap is live in the KCRA 3 Buzz Room.
In all of our political coverage.
Weather impacts everyone, and nobody covers weather like KCRA 3.
6 inches of fresh snow today.
It's one of the many reasons viewers have come to trust KCRA 3 weather coverage.
It's not just the major floods and the snowstorms, but the daily forecasts, new science, and new technology.
You might say weather started it all. When floods hit Sacramento Valley in 1955, KCRA realized the impact a local news station could have.
We will be going on with continuous flood watch coverage.
The storm surge is going through right now. From there, weather became a touchstone of KCRA's coverage.
I did weather from 1969 to 1979.
Could begin to affect the weather over the weekend, probably Saturday night or Sunday.
I loved it. It was exciting, it was fun. We innovated. We had the Valley's first pollen reports, the first pollution reports.
Today's PSI was 118. That's in the unhealthy category.
My first station when I first started working in television was 1983 in Portland, Maine. And we had those glass boards that we would literally paint on. We paint cold fronts, we paint numbers and all that sort of thing.
It's a total revolution. When I look at what they have available, I can only wish we had it back then, but we did the best we could. I mean, we had hand-drawn maps.
And once again, KCRA is at the front of one of those firsts.
I got here in 1991, late 1991. KCRA had purchased, but not yet installed, the first Doppler radar that was going to be installed west of the Rockies. Nobody else west of the Rockies had a Doppler radar. KCRA puts it on the air.
The heaviest rain is currently taking place in the foothills.
One of the things that we found that we had to do was to educate people what they were seeing in terms of light green means light rain, dark green means heavier rain, yellow, red, what do the colors mean?
As quickly as weather technology changes, weather continues to be at the forefront of viewers' minds and KCRA's coverage.
During the time that I was here, 1980 to 2000, we had some of the biggest floods ever. We haven't had any bigger since. You know, the 86 floods, 92 and the 95, we had some of the biggest snowstorms.
I'm standing on the balcony of a home in Serene Lakes. I've climbed up mounds of snow that go up to the second-story windows of homes and stood next to the roof and go, look at all this snow. There have been other times when I've tried to climb up the snowbank and live on television, not been so successful.
The first was in 1995. I was working mornings at the time, and we'd had heavy rain overnight, and we were showing it on Doppler. Showed this area of rain. It was steady from Elk Grove through Roseville. This area, this line just didn't move. Then he got out to Roseville, out by Kirby Creek, and all we saw were rooftops. And my jaw dropped because here were people that were being taken out of their homes. I remember they're on the back of a big flatbed. They were taking people out of the neighborhood because the creek rose so fast and we didn't know. Roseville had stream gauges there, but we didn't know.
The biggest one that still comes to my mind was the floods of 1997, January, New Year's Day. We knew there was a storm coming. We knew there was going to be some heavy rain. We were in special NBC programming.
We'll get to the football game in just a few minutes. The heavier rain during the nighttime hours did cause some localized street flooding.
And I recall at one point getting on the phone with the news director at the time and saying, I think we need to do a little bit more here. And we had one more little 3-minute cut in to do.
And there are mudslides on the highway in yards.
I'll never forget this. He said, well, why don't you just make it open-ended and we'll see how it goes.
Here, a motorist underestimated how deep and fast the water was rising.
So we started to do this little 3-minute update, and 2.5, 3 days later, we were still on the air.
A gas station with torrents of water pouring through.
We don't have Google Maps. We're trying to convey what it is we're looking at. So what I did have was on our radar system, we had a mapping system. So I started working with our helicopter guy, and we just did this impromptu on the air. By way of railroad tracks and other landmarks that are sticking out of the water, we were able to show what was underwater and what was out of water.
We saw him sitting there forlornly just out on the rooftop.
And through it all, one image stood out from all of the others. Video of a dog stranded on the roof of a home in a flooded orchard north of Sacramento. It would turn out to be a story with a happy ending, thanks to KCRA.
And of course, the happiest moment was when Rodeo the dog, who was stranded on top of a house, was rescued by our own helicopter pilot, Michael Kidd, and photographer Ron Middlecoff. And this is on live TV. It was a wonderful moment in an otherwise pretty tense 3 days in Sacramento.
Well, how are you doing? I did too.
It was remarkable coverage. It was unexpected in terms of what the storm brought. It was unexpected in what we were able to deliver. But I think really as journalists and as members of the community, we really excelled at public service. It's one of the proudest things I've ever done.
We're looking actually over west, much west of the Chico-Durham area.
Dan Shively's Next to the Last Day. You know, one of our legendary helicopter pilots, Dan Shively, it's his next to the last day. Sometime in the 5 to 6 o'clock hour, Dan finds a tornado. So we have a tornado live on the ground. It was basically in the middle of nowhere. It wasn't in a populated area, thank goodness, but to have these stunning pictures of a tornado from Shively on his next to the last day, coming right after Oprah, it was just one of those days that I was both nervous, excited. It was an interesting day. My training's all in weather forecasting, and you know, I'm used to looking at things like storms coming in and wind and temperatures and that sort of thing. But fire, I've had to educate myself on fire since coming to Northern California, and it's been quite a learning experience.
There have been instances where we have been standing so close to the fire that as you're talking, you start to feel the heat and you look and you're like, oh my goodness, we need to move.
Flames are all around.
The way that the weather works into it in terms of wind.
The wind is coming in off the delta and it is really, really feeding this fire, and it is blowing embers everywhere.
And you never take it for granted. I mean, once you've seen those sort of pictures and to see the way the weather can impact people in a devastating way, you can never take it for granted. You can never take a situation lightly.
We're going to get you up to date on all of what's going on in Northern California related to the heavy weather that went through last night.
It doesn't matter if it's one home, one person's backyard, or an entire neighborhood that might be impacted. Somebody's going to be impacted by the weather that's going to happen, and you have to address their concerns.
Coverage which makes Channel 3 your station.
Before 1979, live breaking news was always covered on the ground. Then,
only Channel 3 has live Copter 3.
KCRA launched a new era in local television coverage.
We had a dedicated Cessna that we used for traffic reports in radio. On a lark, I had gotten my helicopter license, knowing I could never use it because it was too expensive, but then all of a sudden things started happening a few years later, and Channel 3 was one of the first stations in the country to actually own its own helicopter.
Moments later, Dan Shively and Live Copter 3 were first on the scene.
I was here, and I jumped into that.
Live Copter 3 was a huge game changer for us.
Sacramento Sheriff's Department helicopter Star went down in the area.
It put us up in the air. It gave us a perspective that we never had seen before.
Widen out and take a look at the panorama. This is what it's all about. It is just gorgeous up here today.
It gave us the ability to respond to things very, very quickly. It was unique, it was different.
Like I say, this is just a very, very spread out fire.
It was a new tool, and we learned how to use it very effectively.
One of the things I didn't realize was the helicopter is a celebrity.
It's here.
Everybody knows Live Copter 3.
Faster, so you get breaking news even sooner.
It's developed a lot of respect over the years, thanks to, well, Dan Shively. He was the pioneer there. And so I had some pretty big shoes to fill.
You have to remember, when we first got the helicopter, there was really no equipment available. We had to, make it pretty much ourselves, and it developed over the years.
This is what the weather is like in the heart of the Sierra.
There was a big avalanche at Alpine Meadows in the early 80s, and the weather turned so bad we had to land, and I was stuck up there with the photographer for 3 days. And that was an interesting one too, in that we got there and we had to drop dynamite out of the helicopter.
Dynamite was loaded aboard Live Copter 3.
And by virtue of the fact we had a helicopter and were there, we became part of the story. I said, well, who's supposed to be doing this? And they said, well, the highway patrol, but they couldn't make it because of bad weather. Well, what am I doing here? But it was an interesting story, and they loaded up the helicopter with a couple of guys, and we went around the cornices and threw out chunks of dynamite and blew up these pieces of snow hanging over.
2 years earlier, Live Copter 3 was called on for a much different kind of story and assignment, covering an extortion attempt at a Lake Tahoe casino.
There was some people rolled a bomb into Harvey's and then wanted a ransom for it to not detonate. And this was before satellite, so there was really no way to get a live shot out of downtown South Lake Tahoe.
Experts tried to defuse the bomb, but in the process, it went off.
We used a portable microwave transmitter to go from the ground to the helicopter, and I was up at 12,000 feet, and that was line of sight back to Sacramento, and we were able to cover that story live, and the other stations around town could not figure out how we were doing that.
Dave Allen in Live Copter 3 over the King Fire, where we're seeing the fire coming very close to Highway 50.
You know, one of the best ways to see a fire is from the air. You don't really get that impact of how big an area it is or how large that fire is. You don't get that unless you see it from the air.
Check it out, a growing wildfire burning out of control in Tuolumne and Mariposa counties.
The rim fire was the one probably that sticks in my mind the most. Plus how that fire ran was very different. It was dozens and dozens of small fires that all combined to make that whole area go up.
Let's go ahead and show you, here's the map of where this all started.
October 2014, a crime spree and manhunt stretching from Sacramento to the Sierra foothills that would leave 2 sheriff's deputies dead. Live Copter 3 was in the air for hours, helping us provide critical information to the communities affected.
Also have Live Copter 3 over the scene to give you a very unique aerial view of the search.
There was quite a bit going on. You know, we launched in the helicopter and we had things going on from Arden Fair all the way out to Auburn.
The area of Belmont is where they are currently chasing somebody right now.
We had a reporter there, and that frees me to just simply fly, work the radios, and act as an airborne producer. There's many hats that get worn from the pilot seat. There's the pilot hat, the producer hat, the director hat, and now the reporting hat as well.
We see 3 helicopters circling overhead.
Whether it's covering fires, floods, or other disasters,
Live Copter 3 over the scene of the fatal crash in Orland shows the extent of the damage.
Tracking traffic on a busy holiday weekend.
It's pretty from here, not so pretty if you're those folks going across the top tonight.
Or following a pair of wayward whales that swam from the Golden Gate all the way to West Sacramento.
We're getting some good tail flapping here.
Live Copter 3 has given us a unique perspective on places, people, and major events all across Northern California.
So press from all over the world have their eyes on Sacramento and these 3 hometown heroes today.
Investigations that spark action. KCRA in the community and at the Olympics when KCRA 3 60 Years of Excellence continues.
To get in front of this as these embers are just ripping across the landscape here.
KCRA, where the news comes first. And for the past 60 years, there has been a lot of news to cover. April 1973, a train carrying thousands of bombs destined for the Vietnam War caught fire at the Roseville rail yard. The explosions continued for more than a day and could be heard all across the Sacramento area and beyond. 1976, the small Central Valley farm town of Chowchilla. 3 men kidnapped a busload of children and buried them in a moving van at a Northern California quarry. The kids and their bus driver managed to escape. Their kidnappers went to prison.
As you can see by what's happening to the blinds in back of us, we're having an earthquake.
October 1989, just after 5 p.m., we were on the air when the Loma Prieta earthquake shook all of Northern California.
The upper deck of the Bay Bridge has collapsed.
Once again, KCRA provided some of the first images of the devastation to NBC, CNN, and others around the world.
These pockets of fire are just jumping all over the place.
2 years later, a fire fanned by strong north winds swept through the Oakland Hills. Before it was out, 25 people would lose their lives and nearly 3,000 homes would be destroyed.
In our next report, a death row inmate discusses a life of crime that leads to a final and violent and fatal shootout.
And when it came to covering big stories for KCRA, one name stands out among all the others.
When it comes to big stories, Mike Boyd was the legend when it came to news in Sacramento.
What is it that draws people to you?
Mike Boyd is probably the one journalist that I've met in my career in TV news that truly, absolutely loved his job.
Mr. Montalvo, what can you tell us about the murders?
And perhaps the story Mike Boyd is most remembered for is that of a Sacramento landlady who poisoned tenants of her boarding house on F Street, buried their bodies in the yard, and pocketed their Social Security checks.
They're looking for victim number 7 in the front yard of this home.
As the search for bodies continued, Dorothea Puente slipped away. An arrest warrant was issued, and days later, police caught up with her in Southern California.
We couldn't get a plane out of Sacramento because they were all booked. So our station decided to get a plane. So we got a plane, jumped on it. But when the cops said, hey, could you change the flight plan? We said, yes, go do it. They said, hey, we're going to pick her up.
The private jet we chartered to Los Angeles ended up being the plane that carried Dorothea Puente back to Sacramento. And on the way, she talked to us.
I have not killed anyone. I told you that. I have not killed anyone.
And then he was there the night the assassination of Bobby Kennedy.
For all of those at home viewing this, people here cannot believe it.
No, you didn't answer my question.
Mike Boyd hasn't been the only dogged reporter. KCRA3 took up the mantle of strong journalism from the beginning.
Ted Kaczynski, the serial bomber.
I remember the Unabomber because I knew the man that he killed in Sacramento.
We did have a bomb go off. I don't know exactly where. It's inside the building on the north side of I Street here.
Here in Sacramento, a bomb was planted that killed somebody. And there was not a good clue as to who, where, how.
JC, you hear Mommy, I love you. And I want you to come home tonight.
A car raced by, cut her off, and 2 people inside snatched her.
So J.C. Lee Dugard, another one of those stories where you're just like, wow, I can't believe it.
J.C. Dugard was found alive in Antioch. Excuse me. She was found alive in Antioch.
Authorities now say that J.C. Dugard has been living for the past 18 years with the couple who abducted her from near her home in South Lake Tahoe when she was just 11 years old.
But the overriding feeling that detectives had at that time was, what went wrong? Because someone doesn't disappear that long without some red flags along the way that somebody didn't notice or somebody discounted, or why is that little girl in this backyard?
So we are announcing today a $50,000 reward for information that leads directly to the location and recovery of Lacey.
As the reporter who covered the Scott Peterson trial gavel to gavel, people still ask me, what was the fascination across America with that particular murder trial? And I think that the answer is that it was a mystery.
Scott wanted to be free. Lacey was like an anchor around his neck, and so he put one around hers.
When you had beautiful, pregnant Lacey Peterson disappearing right before Christmas, her handsome husband appearing to be frantically looking for her, and then arrested on murder charges. And it wasn't until we were about halfway through that trial that I think most people, including the jury, got some answers. And that's when his mistress took the stand. And there were many other big stories, from a day-long hostage standoff at a Sacramento electronics store that came to an explosive ending with 3 of the gunmen and 3 of the hostages dead.
That was probably a night of terror that we had never seen before. And that is still called the largest hostage negotiation crisis in the United States history. 8 hours, 41 hostages, 6 people killed. There had never been anything like this before.
For someone my age, I've been through an awful lot.
To the kidnapping of a young newspaper heiress.
Well, the sign used to say we all deserve the freedom to marry, and now I've had to make one small change. We all have the freedom to marry.
And a landmark decision on same-sex marriage.
All gay people can now get married and be as happy as I am.
But sometimes, it's not the biggest story that connects with our viewers. Most often, it's the personal ones.
A couple summers ago, when the little girl died of a peanut allergy, and her parents, as grief-stricken as they were, they wanted to get that message out that food allergies are real and they're serious.
It was always my greatest fear, and that we're sitting here talking about it, it seems surreal.
And while the interview on television got a lot of exposure, there are still places that will repost that story from around the world.
I love the big stories, obviously, where we're on the front lines, but I'm going to be honest with you, my favorite stories are sometimes the quiet stories.
But for Joanne, now the nightmare is finally over. For 2 years, she's been trying to get one answer. Where is her daughter Sarah buried?
They are the stories where people come back to us. They either call us or they write. And they're the stories where people say, you made a difference in my life.
Part of KCRA's commitment to the community is giving you more than just the news of the day.
From early news series to Call 3 for Action to KCRA 3 Investigates, we bring you stories that spark action, hold people accountable, and even change laws.
We have continued our investigation, and it has led to one of the top officials of the Republican Party in the state of Nevada.
Just you back there?
We're very fortunate to have the resources to take people off the street, so to speak, on a daily basis and go look for things.
Fire dispatch, what is the address of the emergency?
Watch the clock in the corner. We're documenting everything in real time.
From looking at what causes wildfires.
They are burning out in the open.
To people buying and selling food off of Facebook.
You were selling some chicken adobo. Are you still selling some?
I covered this power plant intensely for about 10 years.
Caltrans is spending even more money hiring a consultant.
After our investigation, he drastically changed the penalties.
People look to the news organizations to hold those government officials accountable, to make sure that they're doing their jobs.
We showed our video to State Senator Jerry Hill, who sits on the Senate Environmental Quality Committee.
Just 94 seconds, a minute and a half after our producer met Dr. Kamasura for the very first time, he had this signed recommendation in hand.
And when you do a story that does affect change,
water wells in Rancho Cordova were being shut down because of toxins.
Today, they conducted a sting operation just a couple of blocks from where I'm standing.
Stop it. Leave him alone.
Hey, turn the camera on. I don't need the camera on me.
This is a
I mean, isn't that why we got into this profession in the first place?
Lynn County, Missouri deputies confiscated one of our tapes without any legal cause.
Well, this is a problem we thought we had settled a couple of days ago, but we were a bit premature.
One of the early cornerstones was Call for Action, which soon became Call 3. But it was far from just a consumer unit.
We had a lot of complaints at one time about sick pets. People would buy puppies at a local pet store, and they were continually getting sick. They were coming up with worms and not living very long.
His lungs are infected or degenerated some way.
We wanted to dig deeper.
No way. No.
Because...
No, just go on. I'm not taking no pictures whatsoever. Just get out. I said no pictures. Now move down the road.
We went to Missouri and Kansas and Nebraska to look at some of the puppy mills that were generating hundreds of puppies every year all over the United States, and it affected change in the long run, where some of these mills were then run out of business by the Humane Society of the United States.
Well, for me, it's Rancho Seco, which was a 10-year assignment from 79 to 89.
You're looking directly into the spent fuel pool.
A lot of people are surprised to know that Sacramento had its own nuclear power plant years ago, and that it had a rather troubled past. It turned out to be built by the same company, Babcock and Wilcox, that built 3 Mile Island. We all know the history of that.
When it ran, it supplied the bulk of Sacramento's needs. The problem was it rarely ran well.
This is the first of a series of live special reports from KCRA News.
It came down to a vote of the public. And the public, the people of Sacramento, voted to shut it down. and they started shutting it down the day after the election.
Oh my God, oh my God. And I can smell it too.
I mean, how many people pay attention to their gas meter, right? I mean, you go out and you walk by it probably every day going, to and from the side of your house. But when you see a zip tie on the gas meter, that might be a little curious.
I can't believe that PG&E wouldn't inform me of what it was.
But when you have 3, 4, 5 zip ties on the gas meter, and then somebody finally tells you, oh, that's because you've been tagged several times over for having a meter that's leaking gas, people are like, what does this mean? Why haven't you done anything about it?
Would appreciate if PG&E would take responsibility.
Do PG&E customers have potentially unsafe meters?
You ought to look into their backgrounds if they've been arrested for these crimes, period. That's from the planet obvious.
I think from my perspective, having joined KCRA 3 Investigates, would be probably the Department of Social Services and changing the law regarding background checks.
But there are some people with arrests for various crimes that have been working in facilities for months before those background checks are complete. Isn't that true?
Not if it's considered to be a serious charge.
But that does not appear to be the case.
The legislators ended up changing state law to make sure that the background checks are done before people go to work in some of these facilities where you have children and elderly.
Look, as journalists, we think the country works better when more people know more things.
So the horses were drugged.
We found stimulants like methamphetamine, amphetamine, cocaine.
Why are you closing it down?
That's what we do. We find things out and we tell people about it.
But the reality is most carjackers are still on the streets.
And the fact that another child committed the crime makes it no easier to bear.
Stories like that take a lot of time.
This is the last thing they want to see happen to any of their customers.
You want to adopt a stepchild? $640.
Some stations just don't feel like that's a good investment in their broadcasting dollar.
It simply is not a crime to be crazy.
They don't want offshore drilling, and they don't want oil tankers.
Whereas here at KCRA, we do invest that time.
Look at this. We've got all of these donations right now from Save Mart supermarkets, all these turkeys, and guess what? They've got a bunch more. Let's see exactly what's going on. Wow! And there is another part of the KCRA 3 commitment, one that has touched people across Northern California and around the world. For all of our 60-year history, we have partnered with local, national, even international groups to help them help others in need. Okay, let's go ahead and present that check to the Red Cross. Enlightening, empowering, and making an impact through storytelling.
Now the company also publishes titles with the authors or well-known actors reading them.
But are these cassettes an affront to real literature?
It's part of their neighborhood crime control effort.
You're visible here, you're walking around. Why is that important?
The story of Locke begins 100 years ago when Chinese immigrants built this town. This was one of the original buildings here in Locke, and as you can see, not much has changed.
Community partnerships.
There are not people back here answering phones on the last 2 lines, and the only way they can answer phones is for you to give them a call.
We have about 28,000 people plus showing up to run to feed the hungry.
Our goal? To fill every one of these boxes with 10 tons of food.
So let's take a look at the total overall, and a lot of this has come from the state employees. The grand total as of right now, 8,017 turkeys.
The Cal Grant volunteers are working pretty hard right now. The phones have been ringing off the hook. At the last count, we have over 1,000 calls.
KCRA 3 reports, remembering Mayor Joe Cerna.
Special programming.
Unlocking the mysteries of autism, unlocking the secrets of the mind.
KCRA will begin an ambitious project to arm kids and parents with information, to teach them what to do when confronted by a stranger.
A huge highway project right through the center of Sacramento.
They got to fix the road, so what do you do?
Tonight, what's wrong with the roadway?
Tonight, our state's golden dream and the present-day realities
That now have California running dry.
When you teach kids what not to do, you also have to teach kids what to do.
What will you do the next time you encounter a bully? Tonight, a KCRA 3 special presentation, Bully.
It can only increase our resolve to build a stronger community and to fight against all forms of hate.
Now, live from Temple B'nai Israel, a special edition of Channel 3 Reports, Hate, Healing, and Hope.
New plans, a changing healthcare system, and for some, tough choices.
Tonight, information to help you decide.
Covering California, ensuring your health. A KCRA 3 Town Hall with Gulston Dard and Edie Lambert.
And community events.
Well, that's right. I'm standing here in Sword Central.
It's nice to get out, get from behind the desk and get out there and meet the people and meet the viewers. I'll never forget Operation Care Package.
Each company has openings, a confidence booster for many.
We're having fun here. We're getting asparagus out. We're rocking to the good music.
KCRA is invested in Northern California. We live in the communities we serve, and each community has unique needs and opportunities. To celebrate diversity and raise awareness of culture, KCRA launched To Be Somebody in 1973.
This situation is bad for our children.
De Colores followed in 74. Perceptions premiered in 79.
Tonight on KCRA 3 Common Ground.
Common Ground carries the torch today.
The KCRA 3 100% has set the standard for community involvement and doing incredible work to make the place we call home better.
At KCRA, who we are outside the office is just as important as who we are inside the office.
I think a local television station such as KCRA, with the commitment to news that we have, has a responsibility in the community to not only inform the community but to give back.
Another hallmark of KCRA, our Olympic coverage, the drama, the excitement, and the stories behind the international games. And starting with the 2000 Sydney Games, Deirdre Fitzpatrick and photographer Mike Domalog have traveled the globe, bringing the Olympic Games home to Northern California.
We've worked together as a team for the last 8 Olympics.
That over there is Parliament.
So the joke in my house is that I've traveled more of the world with Dami.
Aussie, Aussie, Aussie!
than I have my husband, which is true.
That's true.
We're going really slow. Really.
Because the entire wall is pretty much on a 45-degree angle, so you're either climbing or trying not to fall the entire time.
So we've been around the world a little bit.
PK, yeah, we are.
We have worked as an Olympic team together for a long time. I'm going to give you a quiz. See if you can remember where we've been. 2000.
Sydney, Australia.
2002.
Salt Lake City.
2004, Summer Games.
Acropolis, Athens, Greece.
2006.
Vancouver.
No.
We
were in Italy. 2008. Summer
Beijing,
Games.
China.
Oh, man.
2010 Winter Games.
The limo drivers are pretty much getting a non-stop workout.
Vancouver, Canada.
2012.
London.
Probably one of the best yet. London was spectacular. And then 2014.
Sochi, Russia.
Sochi, Russia.
Welcome to Olympic Park. Have a nice day.
That was a crazy one.
It's really hit me now how momentous all this is.
We both grew up loving to watch the Olympics on TV, so to get to team up as we have for 8 Olympics has been absolutely incredible.
60 years of coverage across Northern California and around the world. 60 years of growth, change, and innovation. 60 years of excellence.
It's a lot, and for some it might be considered enough.
But at KCRA 3, we see 60 years as just the start. From those of us in front of the camera to those working behind the scenes, producers, editors, writers, and photographers.
Also our engineering and production teams, and many more who keep KCRA running around the clock every day of the year, on the air, online, and on mobile.
Each of us working with one commitment, one promise, one legacy in mind, where the news comes first.
For all of us here at KCRA, thank you for the trust you've put in us all these years.
We are proud of our achievements, grateful for your support, and eager to embrace all the opportunities ahead of us.